Thanks for inviting me. I'm flattered to be invited and delighted to address such an august audience. I've changed the title somewhat. To this. I've added a kind of subtitle because what I'm actually going to be talking about is how thinking about size and scale can lead to some very fundamental questions about the dynamics, the underlying principles, the organization of many different kinds of so-called complex systems, from the way we function, from the way life functions overall, all the way to social organizations. And some of the questions are implied in that title, the subtitle, especially questions about growth, innovation, and whether systems are sustainable. And that's going to be kind of the theme of this talk. You're all familiar with scale. This is an ancient slide, as you can see. You've all done it yourself. You've scaled up to be who you are. And the question is, are there any kind of laws or principles or underlying quantitative ways of understanding this? And that will be a part of what I'm going to be talking about. But we can expand the thinking of scale to something like this. Think of us as a mammal. Mammals span a range of about 100 million in size, from the shrew that sits on the palm of my hand to a blue whale, which is much bigger than this building or this room. And let's see, I have a pointer here. I want to show you something. That if you look at this slide, this is a shrew on the scale of an elephant, and this is an elephant on the scale of a whale. So it's an enormous range. And the question is, what is the scaling phenomena that unites all of these? Is the elephant just a scaled-up shrew in some ways, and is the whale a scaled-up shrew or a scaled-up human being? And how did natural selection use the same principles and the same materials to create all of these to function in a coherent and sustainable way? Well, we can take this much further and go down to the very biochemicals, which is here. This is a cartoon of the biochemistry that produces ATP, which is your currency of energy, which keeps you alive. This is a little engine which sits inside mitochondria. There's about 500 to 1,000 of these inside of mitochondria. There's one of them inside a cell. So this has to scale up inside a mitochondrion in a coherent way. Mitochondria have to scale up within cells, and there are about 1 million of these little engines inside a cell. And then, of course, all of those cells, the 10 to the 12th or 10 to the 14th, have to scale up in some extraordinary way to produce things like this and this. And then all of these have to interact in some scaled-up version to produce structures like this, ant colonies. And we have to interact and scale up, interacting with one another, to produce things like this, cities and companies and so on. And that's what's going to be the theme of this talk. And these are the kinds of questions that are basic to keep in mind. I won't be able to answer them. I'll answer the first a little bit, but the second I will keep as a secret. So our company is very large organisms like biology. And intriguingly, why do all companies seem destined to die, and yet all cities, with the well-known exceptions, primarily continue to exist? So here are just some of the characteristics of life, and obviously you can think of those in terms of social organizations. And this work, I am a scientist. I'm interested in what's in red, underlying laws, principles, leading to some kind of quantitative predictive framework. Can we understand, for example, why I can look around this room and make the prediction that everybody in this room will be dead in 100 years? Actually, looking around, maybe, but you know what I mean. And where in the hell does that number come from in terms of molecular timescales in genes and so forth? So here are some just images of question. This is how your metabolism works. How is that related to a company structure, a corporate structure? How is this, which is your circuitry system, related to this? Turns out these are identical in terms of their mathematical and physical principles. Is this just another version of this? Is the city just a great big forest? The work I'm going to talk about can answer the following questions. In fact, any kind of coarse-grained question you want to ask about that forest can be answered. It looks like a mess of trees and plants. It isn't. Well, it is, but they have extraordinary regularity and structure. So you can answer the question, how many trees are there of a given size? How many branches does that tree have? How big is the canopy of this tree? How much energy is flowing through a particular branch or through a particular tree? Any kind of generic question that you'd like to ask about the organization, structure, and mechanism that's going on in that forest, you can answer. And the question is, can you do the same for that and the companies that are implicit in those buildings? Okay. So here's the way in. This is a plot of the most fundamental quantity in biology and maybe in any organization, including yours, namely how much energy and resources are required per second to sustain it. And that's plotted on the vertical axis, and you can see the scale is logarithmic. It goes up by factors of 10, as does the mass down on the horizontal axis. And here's what's amazing. It lines up on a straight line when plotted this way. This is amazing because this is maybe the most diverse and complex phenomenon in the universe, yet it scales in a way that expresses extraordinary simplicity. Each one of these organisms, each subunit of that organism, each cell type has evolved in its own unique, historically contingent environmental niche, yet they've all lined up in some systematic way, indicating there's some underlying constraint. It goes across all kinds of organisms, and here's the mathematical expression. Don't get frightened for those that are a little bit challenged by such a simple equation. The statement we say is that metabolic rate scales as mass to the 3/4 because the slope of this line is 3/4. Meaning if you increase by 4 orders of magnitude the mass, where you would expect the energy required would be 4 orders of magnitude, 10,000 times more. In fact, you only need 1,000 times, 3 orders of magnitude as much energy. That's the 3 to 4. This is an extraordinary economy of scale. So this is ubiquitous across all of life, okay? These scaling laws are expressed for every trait or characteristic you could think of about life. And I'm not going to show you, I could show you 100 of such graphs. I just show you this one arbitrarily. It happens to be heart rate, plotted in the same way. Heart rate decreases systematically with size, lifespan does, rate of diffusion, and so on. But the point is, metabolic rate sets the pace of life. And systematically, small things live very fast, die young, big things live very slowly and die old in a systematic way. And why? Because of networks. What these laws that cover and constrain all of life are manifesting are the universal, generic, mathematical, topological, geometric properties of all the networks that sustain you and all of life around you. Not only you in terms of your things like your circulatory system, respiratory system, your renal system, your bones, your neural system, but also within your cells and so forth. So here's just, I'm just going to flash on the pictures of networks that you're familiar with. That's your brain, actually. That's your lungs. That's a tree, another tree. That's a little thing that lives inside an elephant. That's a cell. That's a network inside a cell. That's a network inside a mitochondrion. And there is mathematics describing these networks. And the mathematics, the general principles, transcend the particular design. These are completely different designs, but they're all networks. And the kinds of generic ideas about networks are things like they're space filling. Every cell, for example, has to be fed. Every customer of a company or every part of the organization has to be connected to the network. So it is those properties, and this is not the place, obviously, to show you any of that mathematics. But if you take those ideas, these generic principles of the networks, and you mathematize them, and you work for several years, and you grind out equations, you can understand all of those scaling laws and much, much more, including, for example, if you perversely wanted to know what is the length, radius, pulse rate, flow velocity, stress on the 9th branch of a hippopotamus's arterial system, there is a formula that you can derive that gives you the right answer for the average hippopotamus, and so on and so forth. And that's generic from the microscopic all the way through to the ecological system of the forest I showed you. Okay, so that's just flashing. I'm not going to describe these, just showing you fits to data. There's tons of data. And there's, oh, I will show you this. This is a prediction from that theory of the tallest trees across the United States given the environmental conditions. And one, I don't know which, is the prediction, and one is the data. So let's go back to this. Growth. You grew. There's your, if you were a rat, that's, I could have shown one from a pediatrician, a human being. Here's a rat, pediatrician's curve. Weight versus age. Typical sigmoidal shape, you grow fast and then stop. So here's the mathematics behind it. This is, I've taken all the bells and whistles off. This is what happens, and you know it. You eat, you metabolize the energy. What happens to it? Some goes through the networks to sustain cells and replace those that have died, and some goes into growth. There's lots of bells and whistles you can add. And here's the equation, which I'm not going to discuss, to show you can put it in mathematical form, and you can solve that equation. The only point of that equation is to point out that you can do it and that it has universal parameters. So you tell me that an organism, I can derive for you its growth curve. And here are some examples. There's a fish, bird, cow, and these have very different scales of life and so on. You can determine time to maturity, et cetera, and so on. And I'm just going to flash this on because I love this next one. The mathematics tells you how to rescale the way you plot these so that each animal grows in the same way. That's just to show you the extraordinary unity of life that is governed by the dynamics and mathematics of networks that are constraining the way life evolves. I find this is just a totally tangential remark, personal remark. I find this spiritual, actually. That's as I do walking through a forest and knowing that there's an extraordinary structure.